The autumn rain drummed against the cracked windows of Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center in East Oakland, creating a rhythmic soundtrack to the evening's activities. Inside the modest building, fluorescent lights flickered intermittently over mismatched tables and folding chairs that had seen better decades. The aroma of home-cooked food mingled with the scent of worn carpet and determination that seemed to permeate every corner of the space. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jasmine Washington moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her worn sneakers silent against the linoleum floor. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced life's storms and emerged with her spirit intact, though not unscathed. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and despite the exhaustion that lined her dark eyes, her smile remained genuine as she served portions of red beans and rice to the small gathering of homeless individuals and struggling families who had sought shelter from both the weather and their circumstances. "Mrs. Washington, this smells incredible," called out Marcus, a veteran in his 50s whose calloused hands shook slightly as he accepted his plate. "You always know exactly what we need." Jasmine's smile widened as she ladled an extra portion onto his plate. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said food tastes better when it's made with love and shared with purpose." What the diners at the community center didn't know was that Jasmine herself hadn't eaten since the previous morning. Her last $23 had gone toward ingredients for tonight's meal, and tomorrow's rent payment loomed like a thundercloud on her horizon. Her 8-year-old daughter, Destiny, waited at home with homework spread across their kitchen table, probably wondering why dinner would be delayed again. Got at a corner table, partially hidden in the shadows cast by a broken ceiling light, sat a man who seemed oddly out of place despite his carefully chosen attire. David Mitchell had spent considerable effort that morning selecting clothes that would help him blend in. A worn denim jacket over a faded Northwestern University sweatshirt, jeans with authentic wear patterns, and work boots that looked appropriately scuffed. At 54, the tech entrepreneur had perfected the art of disappearing into crowds, a skill that served him well during his quarterly reality checks, when he stepped away from boardrooms and penthouses to observe the world from ground level. David's net worth exceeded $12 billion, though the only hint of his true status was the quality of his dental work and the unconscious way he carried himself with quiet confidence. Tonight, he had driven his oldest, most nondescript car to this part of Oakland, parking 3 blocks away and walking through neighborhoods where his usual security detail would have caused unwanted attention. He had discovered the community center through his foundation's research into grassroots organizations that operated without fanfare or government funding. According to the reports on his desk, the MLK Community Center survived on donations that barely covered utilities, staffed entirely by volunteers who gave their time and energy to feed anyone who walked through the doors. What intrigued David most was learning that one volunteer in particular, Jasmine Washington, had been providing free meals 3 nights a week for the past 8 months, despite her own financial struggles. First time here? Jasmine approached his table, carrying a steaming plate of food that made his stomach rumble audibly. He had skipped lunch during back-to-back acquisition meetings, though he rarely thought about missed meals since food was never a concern in his world. "Yes, ma'am," David replied, accepting the plate with genuine gratitude. The portion was generous, the presentation careful despite the humble setting. "This looks amazing." "I hope you enjoy it," Jasmine said, her eyes scanning the room to check on other diners. "There's plenty more if you're still hungry afterward." David took a bite and was genuinely surprised by the complex flavors and expert seasoning. This wasn't institutional food or a hasty charity meal. Someone had taken real care in the preparation, balancing spices with the skill of a trained chef. "This is restaurant quality," he said, looking up at Jasmine with new respect. She laughed softly, a sound that held both pride and weariness. I went to culinary school before life took me in different directions. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Before David could respond, Jasmine had moved on to check on an elderly woman struggling with arthritis who needed help cutting her food. He watched as she knelt beside the woman's chair, gently taking the fork and knife to prepare bite-sized pieces while maintaining a steady stream of warm conversation that preserved the woman's dignity. The evening progressed with a steady flow of individuals and families seeking not just food, but human connection. David observed Jasmine remembering everyone's names, asking about job searches and doctor's appointments, celebrating small victories and offering encouragement during setbacks. She moved through the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of compassion, ensuring everyone felt valued and heard. Around 8:30, the crowd began to thin as people headed back to shelters, transitional housing, or the uncertain safety of the streets. David lingered, helping stack chairs and wipe down tables without being asked. Jasmine noticed his initiative and nodded appreciatively. "Thank you," she said, spraying disinfectant on the last table. "Most people are eager to leave once they've eaten." "It feels good to contribute something useful," David replied honestly. In his regular life, his contributions were measured in millions of dollars and strategic decisions that affected thousands of employees. The simple act of physical labor felt refreshingly immediate and real. As Jasmine gathered the remaining food into containers, David noticed something that made his chest tighten. She was carefully portioning what little remained into small servings, sealing them in recycled containers with meticulous attention. These weren't leftovers being stored for tomorrow's service. These were meals being rationed with the precision of someone for whom every bite mattered. "Excuse me," David said quietly. "Are you taking those home to your family?" Jasmine paused, her hands stilling over the containers. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across her features before being replaced by practiced resilience. "My daughter, and I will be fine. There are people who need this more than we do." The weight of her words settled over David like a revelation. Here was someone literally giving away her last food to strangers, maintaining her generosity even when it meant personal sacrifice. In his world of calculated philanthropy and tax-advantaged giving, he had never witnessed such immediate, costly compassion. "Ma'am," David said carefully, "when did you last eat?" Jasmine's hands resumed their work, but he caught the slight tremor that betrayed her hunger. "I'm not really hungry tonight. Too busy to think about food, you know." The lie was delivered with practiced ease, but David recognized the deflection. He had seen similar expressions in business negotiations, when someone was trying to maintain dignity while facing untenable circumstances. The difference was that Jasmine's circumstances weren't about losing money or market share. They were about survival. "Actually," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I was hoping I could take some of that food with me. I have a long night ahead, and I'd be happy to pay for it." Jasmine looked up, confusion creasing her brow. "Oh, we don't charge for food here. That's not how this works." "I understand," David pressed gently, "but I'd like to make a donation to the center. For the ingredients, the utilities, your time." He pulled out his wallet, being careful to use the worn leather one he carried during these excursions rather than his usual custom-made billfold. "That's very kind, but really not necessary," Jasmine protested, though her eyes briefly flickered to the $20 bills in his hand before looking away. David made a decision that surprised even him. "What if we shared it? I hate eating alone, and it seems wrong to take food away from someone who prepared it with such obvious care." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Around them, the community center settled into evening quiet, the last volunteers finishing cleanup duties and preparing to lock up for the night. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against windows that needed replacing. and the fluorescent lights hummed their electrical lullaby. Jasmine studied David's face, searching for hidden motives or condescension. What she found instead was genuine respect and an invitation to dignity rather than charity. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. "I suppose I could eat a little something," she conceded. "It has been a long day." They sat at one of the clean tables, sharing food from paper plates while the building emptied around them. David was struck by how naturally conversation flowed despite their vastly different backgrounds. Jasmine spoke about her daughter's aptitude for mathematics, her pride evident even as she worried about affording advanced tutoring. She mentioned her job at a local diner that barely covered rent, and her evening classes toward a business degree that she attended whenever childcare arrangements allowed. "What about you?" Jasmine asked, spooning rice thoughtfully. "What brings you to our neighborhood?" David had prepared for this question, crafting a backstory that contained enough truth to feel authentic. "I work in tech, mostly behind the scenes stuff. I've been volunteering at different community organizations around the Bay Area, trying to understand how they operate and what they need." "That's admirable," Jasmine said. "Most tech people I read about seem pretty disconnected from neighborhoods like this one." "Some are," David agreed. "I think success can insulate you from reality if you're not careful. It's important to remember that innovation should serve everyone, not just people who can afford the latest gadgets." As they talked, David found himself genuinely engaged in a way that boardroom conversations rarely achieved. Jasmine's insights about community needs were more valuable than most consulting reports he'd commissioned. Her understanding of systemic issues came from lived experience rather than academic theory, and her proposed solutions were both practical and innovative. "You know," she said, warming to a subject that is clearly passionate about her, "people always talk about food deserts and lack of access to nutrition, but they miss the bigger picture. It's not just about getting fresh vegetables into corner stores. It's about teaching cooking skills, creating community kitchens, building relationships that make neighborhoods stronger." David leaned forward, intrigued. "What would that look like in practice?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jasmine's eyes lit up as she described her vision. Mobile cooking classes that met people where they lived, community gardens that doubled as gathering spaces, partnerships with local restaurants to provide both training and employment opportunities. Her ideas were sophisticated and well-reasoned, incorporating elements of urban planning, social work, and business development. "I actually wrote a proposal for something like this as my capstone project," she continued, her voice growing more animated. "My professor said it was graduate-level work, but without startup capital or connections. She shrugged, the enthusiasm dimming slightly. "What happened to the proposal?" David asked. "It's sitting in a folder on my laptop," Jasmine admitted. "Sometimes I update it when I have new ideas, but mostly it just reminds me of things I can't afford to pursue." The conversation was interrupted by Jerome, the community center's evening coordinator, who approached their table with keys jingling in his hand. "Sorry to break this up, but I need to lock up. City regulations, you know how it is." Jasmine immediately began clearing their plates, the spell of their conversation broken by the return of practical concerns. David helped gather the remaining food containers, noting how carefully she handled each one. "Can I walk you to your car?" David offered as they stepped into the cool night air. "I don't drive," Jasmine replied simply. "Bus stops just around the corner." David's luxury vehicle was parked 3 blocks away, but suddenly the idea of driving past her bus stop felt obscene. "Mind if I wait with you? These streets can be unpredictable at night." They stood under the flickering streetlight at the bus stop, 2 people from vastly different worlds united by shared food and genuine conversation. The rain had softened to a fine mist that created halos around the street lamps and made the pavement shine like black mirrors. "Thank you for tonight," Jasmine said quietly. "Not just for staying to help, but for the conversation. It's been a while since someone wanted to hear my ideas rather than just my problems." David felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that this encounter had affected him more deeply than he had anticipated. "Thank you for sharing your food and your vision. Both were nourishing in ways I needed." The bus arrived with a hydraulic sigh and squeal of brakes, its bright interior lights creating a warm beacon in the darkness. As Jasmine climbed the steps, she turned back toward David. "Will we see you again at the center?" she asked. "I hope so," David replied, and meant it more than she could possibly know. As the bus pulled away, David watched until its taillights disappeared around a corner. Then he began the walk back to his car, his mind racing with possibilities and his conscience weighing the responsibility that came with witnessing such profound grace under pressure. By the time he reached his vehicle, David had made a decision that would change both their lives forever. But first, he needed to learn much more about Jasmine Washington and the circumstances that had led someone so talented and generous to serve her last meal to strangers, while her own daughter waited hungrily at home. The rain began to fall harder as David drove through the quiet streets toward his penthouse. But his thoughts remained fixed on a community center in East Oakland, and a woman whose quiet dignity had just challenged everything he thought he knew about real philanthropy. During the 20-minute drive to his downtown San Francisco residence, David found himself replaying moments from the evening with unusual intensity. The careful way Jasmine had portioned the remaining food, the brightness in her eyes when discussing her business proposal, the practiced ease with which she deflected questions about her own needs while focusing entirely on others. His phone buzzed against the leather console, displaying messages from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting and a conference call with investors in Tokyo. The notifications felt surreal after spending hours in a world where $20 could mean the difference between eating and going hungry. David silenced the device and continued driving through the city's transformation from working-class neighborhoods to gleaming financial districts. The contrast struck him more forcefully than usual. Within 15 minutes, he had traveled from a community center where volunteers stretched donated ingredients to feed dozens of people, to streets lined with restaurants where single meals cost more than Jasmine probably spent on groceries in a week. The proximity of such different realities had always existed, but tonight it felt personal rather than abstract. David's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building he had purchased during the early days of his company's expansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Bay Area, and the minimalist interior reflected both his success and his tendency toward practical luxury. As he entered the space, motion sensors activated subtle lighting that gradually illuminated artwork worth more than most people's annual salaries. The refrigerator in his gourmet kitchen contained bottled water, energy drinks, and takeout containers from high-end restaurants that he rarely found time to finish. The irony wasn't lost on him that his garbage disposal consumed more food value than many families ever saw. He opened one of the containers, containing remnants of a $150 tasting menu from the previous evening's client dinner, and found he had no appetite. Instead, David poured himself a glass of water and stood before the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Jasmine was probably helping her daughter with homework at a kitchen table, perhaps explaining why dinner would be simple tonight. The image troubled him more than the complex financial projections he regularly analyzed or the strategic decisions that affected thousands of employees. His laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Marcus Chun, his head of security and the person responsible for coordinating David's periodic ventures into anonymity. The message contained preliminary information about the MLK Community Center, gathered from public records and social media monitoring that Marcus conducted whenever David showed interest in a particular organization or individual. The community center operated on an annual budget that barely exceeded what David spent on office coffee. Founded in 1987, it had survived multiple funding crises through volunteer dedication and creative resource management. The current director, Patricia Williams, was a retired social worker who accepted no salary and somehow kept the doors open through sheer determination and an extensive network of community connections. More relevant to Q, David's current preoccupation was information about Jasmine Washington. Age 28, single mother to Destiny Washington, age 8. Graduated from Oakland Community College's Culinary Arts program with honors, before financial circumstances forced her to leave her restaurant job and piece together income from multiple sources. Currently employed at Mel's Diner on International Boulevard, working morning shifts that allowed her to be home when Destiny returned from school. The data painted a picture of someone making intelligent decisions within severely constrained circumstances. Jasmine's credit score reflected medical debt from her daughter's emergency appendectomy 2 years earlier, but no missed payments or frivolous spending. Her bank records, legally accessible through David's security firm's forensic accounting capabilities, showed deposits from her diner job, occasional catering gigs, and small payments for tutoring neighborhood children in cooking basics. What struck David most forcefully was discovering that Jasmine donated her time at 3 different community organizations beyond the MLK Center. She taught basic nutrition classes at a women's shelter, helped coordinate food drives at Destiny's elementary school, and volunteered at a senior center where she prepared special meals for diabetic residents. Her generosity wasn't situational or performed for observers. It was woven into the fabric of her daily life. David closed the laptop and walked to his home office, a space dominated by multiple monitors displaying real-time data from his various business interests. Stock prices, international market fluctuations, research and development progress reports, and acquisition opportunities competed for attention across the screens. The information represented billions of dollars in assets and decisions that could influence entire industries. Tonight, however, the displays felt like elaborate distractions from more fundamental questions about purpose and impact. David had built his fortune by identifying inefficiencies in how technology served human needs, then creating solutions that generated both profit and genuine utility. His companies had developed software that streamlined medical record systems, platforms that connected isolated seniors with community resources, and applications that helped small businesses compete with larger corporations. Yet somewhere along the path from idealistic startup founder to billionaire CEO, he had lost direct contact with the people his innovations were supposed to serve. Board meetings and investor presentations had replaced conversations with end users. Strategic philanthropy had replaced personal engagement with community needs. Success had created layers of insulation that protected him from market volatility, but also from human reality. The encounter with Jasmine had pierced through those layers with uncomfortable clarity. Her immediate willingness to share her last meal with a stranger embodied values that David's corporate mission statements claimed to represent, but rarely practiced with such directness. Her business proposal, described with passion despite lack of resources to implement it, demonstrated exactly the kind of grassroots innovation his foundation supposedly sought to support. David retrieved a secure phone from his office safe and placed a call to Sarah Martinez, the director of his private foundation. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. Sarah had worked with David for over a decade, managing philanthropic initiatives that distributed tens of millions of dollars annually to carefully vetted organizations focused on education, technology access, and economic development. "I need comprehensive research on community-based food security programs," David said without preamble. "Particularly initiatives that combine nutrition education, skill development, and neighborhood organizing. Focus on projects that operate with minimal overhead and maximum community engagement. Specific geographic area? Sarah asked, her voice alert despite the time. Start with the East Bay, but expand nationally if you find interesting models. I want to understand what works, what doesn't, and why. Also, I need profiles of individuals who are leading innovative community food programs without significant institutional support. Timeline: 48 hours for preliminary findings, full analysis within a week. After ending the call, David returned to the windows overlooking the city. The rain had intensified, creating patterns of light and movement on the glass that reminded him of the flickering fluorescent bulbs in the community center. Somewhere in those lights, families were making difficult decisions about resources. Parents were explaining to children why certain desires had to wait, and individuals like Jasmine were finding ways to maintain hope and generosity despite circumstances that would crush many people's spirits. The following morning arrived gray and subdued, with persistent drizzle that matched David's contemplative mood. His usual routine of reviewing international markets and responding to urgent communications felt mechanical and distant. During his morning conference call with the Tokyo team, he found his attention drifting to questions about their employee meal programs and whether their office buildings included space for community food initiatives. By midday, David had made a decision that would have surprised his closest advisors. Instead of attending the scheduled board meeting to discuss quarterly projections and expansion strategies, he drove back to East Oakland. This time, he parked closer to the community center and spent time walking through the surrounding neighborhood, observing details that had escaped his attention during the previous evening's rain-soaked visit. The area bore the complex markers of a community in transition. Corner stores offered check cashing services alongside overpriced groceries that rarely included fresh produce. Small businesses operated from converted residential buildings, their hand-painted signs advertising services like tax preparation, hair braiding, and cell phone repair. Children played in pocket parks where community gardens shared space with basketball courts, their laughter mixing with the sounds of traffic and construction. David stopped at a bus shelter, where colorful murals depicted scenes of family gatherings and neighborhood celebrations. The artwork had been created by local students, according to a small plaque, as part of a summer program that combined artistic expression with community history education. The images suggested pride and connection that transcended economic circumstances, values that David recognized from his conversation with Jasmine, but had rarely encountered in his professional environment. A few blocks from the community center, David discovered Mel's Diner, the restaurant where Jasmine worked her morning shift. Through rain-streaked windows, he could see her moving between tables with the same graceful efficiency she had displayed while serving food at the volunteer dinner. She wore a uniform that had been carefully maintained despite obvious age, and her interactions with customers reflected the same genuine attention she had shown to community center guests. David entered the diner and chose a corner booth, where he could observe without being intrusive. The menu offered straightforward comfort food at prices that reflected the neighborhood's economic reality. Most entrees cost less than David typically spent on coffee, yet the portions were generous and the preparation clearly careful. He ordered Eggs Benedict, curious about how a culinary school graduate approached the dish within the constraints of a neighborhood diner's kitchen and pricing structure. When Jasmine approached his table, recognition flickered across her features before being replaced by professional courtesy. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Back in the neighborhood again?" "Your suggestion about exploring local community organizations was excellent advice," David replied truthfully. "I wanted to see more of the area during daylight hours." "That's wonderful. This neighborhood has a lot to offer once you know where to look." She refilled his coffee cup with practiced precision. "Will you be joining us at the center again this week?" "I hope so. Last night's dinner was exceptional, and I'd like to contribute more if possible." Jasmine's smile brightened genuinely. We can always use extra hands, especially from someone who actually cleans up after themselves without being asked. As she moved to attend to other customers, David observed the rhythm of the diner's operation. Despite modest resources, the establishment functioned with impressive efficiency. Jasmine coordinated with kitchen staff to ensure orders emerged promptly and correctly. She remembered regular customers' preferences without consulting notes, and she maintained conversation that made each person feel valued rather than rushed. Eggs Benedict, when it arrived, exceeded David's expectations significantly. The hollandaise sauce had been prepared from scratch rather than from a mix. The English muffins were toasted to perfect golden crispness, and the poached eggs achieved the ideal balance between set whites and liquid yolks. The presentation might lack the artistic flourishes of high-end restaurants, but the fundamental technique was flawless. "This is restaurant-quality preparation," David told Jasmine when she returned to check on his meal. "Thank you. I try to bring culinary school standards to everything I cook, regardless of the setting." She glanced around the diner with obvious affection. "Mel gives me freedom to experiment with techniques as long as I stay within budget constraints. It's good practice for larger projects I hope to pursue someday. Like the community kitchen proposal you mentioned last night?" Jasmine's eyes lit up with enthusiasm that transformed her entire demeanor. "Exactly. Imagine if every neighborhood had a space where people could learn cooking skills, share cultural recipes, and access commercial-grade equipment for small catering businesses or special events. It would address food security, job training, and community building simultaneously." David leaned forward, genuinely intrigued by the sophistication of her vision. "How would the economics work? Membership fees for those who can afford them, sliding scale for families in need, partnerships with local restaurants for advanced training opportunities, and revenue from catering services that employ program graduates." The facility could also host nutrition classes, cultural celebrations, and cooking competitions that bring the whole community together. As Jasmine described her concept in greater detail, David realized he was listening to exactly that kind of innovative thinking his foundation claimed to seek out and support. Her proposal addressed multiple social issues through a single integrated approach, demonstrated clear understanding of both community needs and business sustainability, and reflected deep personal investment in successful outcomes. "Have you shared this idea with potential funders for community development organizations?" David asked. Jasmine's expression dimmed slightly. "I've submitted proposals to several foundations, but most require extensive organizational infrastructure that I don't have. As an individual, rather than an established nonprofit, it's difficult to get serious consideration." David nodded, recognizing a systemic problem he had observed in philanthropic circles. Institutional funding often flowed toward organizations with impressive credentials and administrative capacity rather than toward innovative ideas from community members who understood problems most intimately. The result was well-intentioned, but sometimes ineffective programs designed by outsiders rather than solutions developed by people with lived experience. David left the diner with Jasmine's business card, handwritten on the back of a receipt with her personal phone number and a note that read, "Call if you'd like to discuss community kitchen ideas further." The simple gesture carried weight beyond its modest appearance. In his world, business cards were printed on thick stock with embossed logos and multiple contact methods. This humble piece of paper represented something more valuable, genuine invitation for collaboration from someone who had no idea about his resources but trusted his interest in her vision. The afternoon light filtering through Oakland's persistent cloud cover cast the neighborhood in muted tones that somehow enhanced rather than diminished its character. David walked slowly toward his car, noting details that painted a more complete picture of the community Jasmine served. A hand-lettered sign in an apartment window advertised homemade tamales available weekends. Children's bicycles chained to porch railings suggested families making homes despite economic challenges. Community bulletin boards overflowed with notices about job opportunities, childcare exchanges, and mutual aid networks that operated entirely through neighbor-to-neighbor connections. At Roosevelt Elementary School, where Destiny Washington attended. Third grade, David observed the dismissal process from across the street. Parents and guardians gathered in clusters, their conversations mixing English and Spanish as they waited for children to emerge from classrooms. The building showed signs of deferred maintenance common to underfunded public schools, but colorful student artwork decorated windows and bulletin boards, displayed achievements that celebrated academic progress alongside character development. When Destiny appeared in the doorway, David immediately recognized Jasmine's daughter. She possessed her mother's thoughtful eyes and carried herself with quiet confidence unusual for an 8-year-old. Her backpack looked carefully maintained despite obvious age, and she wore sneakers that had been cleaned to maintain dignity even as their worn solace revealed economic necessity. Destiny scanned the crowd until she spotted her mother approaching from the bus stop, then broke into a smile that transformed her serious expression into pure joy. The reunion between mother and daughter struck David as remarkably tender. Jasmine knelt to Destiny's level for a proper hug, asked specific questions about her school day, and listened with complete attention as her daughter described a science experiment involving plant growth and different light conditions. Their walk toward the bus stop continued the conversation, with Destiny animatedly explaining concepts she had learned while Jasmine responded with questions that demonstrated both genuine interest and sophisticated understanding of scientific principles. David maintained careful distance while following their route, using techniques Marcus had taught him for surveillance that appeared casual to casual observers. He watched as they stopped at a small market where Jasmine carefully counted bills before purchasing ingredients for dinner. She allowed Destiny to choose between 2 types of pasta, a decision that seemed significant given their obvious budget constraints. The child chose the less expensive option without being prompted, suggesting conversations about family finances that most 8-year-olds never needed to consider. Their apartment building, a 3-story structure built in the 1960s, housed dozens of families in units that prioritized affordability over luxury. External stairs led to narrow walkways, where residents had created small gardens and containers, and children's toys suggested the presence of young families throughout the complex. Jasmine and Destiny climbed to the 2nd floor, their conversation continuing as they navigated stairs that creaked with age, but remained structurally sound. Through windows that faced the courtyard, David could observe their evening routine without intruding on their privacy. The apartment appeared compact but carefully organized, with furniture that had been chosen for functionality rather than style. Destiny spread homework across a small dining table while Jasmine prepared dinner in a kitchen that maximized limited space through intelligent organization. Every movement reflected efficiency born from necessity, yet the atmosphere seemed warm and purposeful rather than cramped or stressful. David returned to his car and drove to a coffee shop in nearby Berkeley, where he opened his laptop to review the additional research Sarah Martinez had compiled during the day. The expanded profile of Jasmine Washington revealed a story of resilience that explained both her current circumstances and her unwavering commitment to community service. Born in Richmond, California, Jasmine had been raised by her grandmother after her mother's death in a car accident when Jasmine was 12. Her grandmother, Dorothy Washington, had worked as a nurse's aide for 40 years while raising 3 children as a single parent. Dorothy's influence explained Jasmine's combination of practical skills and deep empathy for others facing difficult circumstances. She had taught Jasmine that dignity wasn't determined by wealth, and that everyone possessed valuable knowledge worth sharing. Academic records showed Jasmine excelling in high school despite working part-time jobs to contribute to household expenses. She had been accepted to UC Berkeley with partial scholarships, but chose Oakland Community College instead to remain close to her aging grandmother, while pursuing culinary arts training that would provide immediate employment opportunities. Her professors consistently praised her creativity, technical skill, and natural leadership abilities. The trajectory changed dramatically during Jasmine's final semester of culinary school. Dorothy Washington suffered a stroke that required extensive medical care and rehabilitation. Jasmine took leave from her studies to provide caregiving while working multiple jobs to cover medical expenses not covered by Medicare. Dorothy died 6 months later, leaving Jasmine with grief, incomplete education, and substantial debt from medical bills. Shortly after her grandmother's death, Jasmine discovered she was pregnant. The father, a fellow culinary student, initially promised support but disappeared when faced with the reality of parenthood and financial responsibility. Jasmine made the decision to continue the pregnancy while working at a restaurant that provided health insurance benefits. She returned to work 6 weeks after Destiny's birth, relying on a network of neighbors and community members for childcare support. For 3 years, Jasmine built a stable life working as a line cook at a respected Oakland restaurant. Her supervisors valued her reliability and skill, and she was promoted to sous chef with hopes of eventually opening her own establishment. The trajectory toward professional success ended abruptly when Destiny required emergency surgery for appendicitis. Despite having health insurance, the medical bills exceeded their coverage limits and forced Jasmine to declare bankruptcy. The financial crisis coincided with restaurant industry upheaval during the early pandemic period. Jasmine's restaurant reduced staff by 60%, eliminating her position along with her health insurance and career advancement opportunities. She transitioned to food service jobs that offered more flexibility for single parenthood, but significantly lower wages and no benefits. The transition from culinary professional to diner waitress represented more than income reduction. It meant setting aside professional aspirations to focus entirely on immediate survival. David closed the laptop and stared out the coffee shop window at university students discussing assignments and social plans with the casual assumption that their futures would unfold according to their preferences. The contrast with Jasmine's story highlighted how circumstances beyond individual control could derail carefully planned trajectories. Her current situation reflected not poor choices or lack of ambition, but systemic vulnerabilities that punished people for prioritizing family care over career advancement. The research revealed another dimension of Jasmine's character that deepened David's respect for her approach to adversity. Throughout every crisis and setback, she had maintained her volunteer commitments to community organizations. During her grandmother's illness, she had continued teaching cooking classes at the senior center where Dorothy received services. After Destiny's surgery, she had organized meal trains for other families facing medical emergencies. Her response to personal hardship consistently involved increased service to others rather than withdrawal from community engagement. The deeper we dig into Jasmine Washington's background, the more interesting this becomes, Marcus began without preamble. Her financial problems aren't just about medical debt and restaurant industry volatility. Someone has been actively sabotaging her opportunities. David leaned forward, his attention sharpening. Explain. Marcus activated one of the tablets, displaying financial records and employment documents. 3 times in the past 2 years, Jasmine has been offered positions at restaurants owned by the Meridian Restaurant Group. Each time, the offers were rescinded within days, allegedly due to budget constraints or organizational restructuring. That could be a coincidence. Perhaps, except that Meridian continued hiring for the same positions immediately after withdrawing their offers to Jasmine. We found online job postings with identical descriptions posted within a week of each rescission. Marcus swiped to reveal additional evidence. More concerning is the pattern with her apartment applications. She's been denied rentals in better school districts despite having sufficient income and references, often with explanations that don't match standard underwriting criteria. David studied the documents with growing unease. Someone's been systematically blocking her opportunities for advancement. It appears so. The question is who and why. Marcus produced another set of records. Jasmine's credit report shows inquiries from organizations that have no legitimate reason to review her financial history. Employment verification requests from companies where she never applied. Background checks initiated by entities that don't identify themselves through standard reporting channels. The implications settled over David like cold realization. Someone with resources and connections had been monitoring Jasmine's attempts to improve her circumstances and actively interfering with her progress. The harassment was sophisticated enough to appear like bad luck rather than deliberate sabotage, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Any theories about motivation? David asked. Marcus hesitated, which was unusual for someone known for directness. We found one connection that might explain everything. Jasmine's grandmother, Dorothy Washington, worked at Richmond General Hospital for 4 decades. Her personnel file shows that during her final years, she filed several complaints about patient care violations and financial irregularities in the Medicare billing department. She was a whistleblower, exactly. Her complaints led to an investigation that resulted in the termination of 6 administrators and recovery of nearly $2 million in fraudulent Medicare claims. The hospital avoided federal prosecution by cooperating fully and implementing new oversight procedures. David felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align. Someone involved in the original fraud scheme has been taking revenge on Dorothy's family. That's our working theory. The timeline matches perfectly. The interference with Jasmine's opportunities began approximately 6 months after Dorothy's death, when her complaints were no longer protected by active whistleblower status. Marcus pulled up additional documentation. Several of the terminated administrators have remained active in Bay Area healthcare management. They have access to background check services, professional networks, and financial institutions that could facilitate the kind of systematic harassment we're observing. The revelation transformed David's understanding of Jasmine's struggles from unfortunate circumstances to deliberate persecution. Her grandmother's ethical stand against healthcare fraud had triggered retaliation that continued to punish the next generation. The injustice of the situation activated something fierce and protective in David's character that surprised him with its intensity. I want names, addresses, current employment information, and complete financial profiles of everyone involved in the original Medicare fraud, David said quietly. I also want to know every instance of interference with Jasmine's opportunities, documented with enough detail to prove deliberate harassment. Marcus nodded, recognizing the tone that meant his employer had moved from curious observation to active intervention. Timeline? 72 hours. And Marcus? David's voice carried steel beneath its calm surface. These people chose to destroy someone's livelihood to protect their own guilty consciences. They're about to learn that some decisions carry consequences they never anticipated. After Marcus departed, David remained in his office reviewing the accumulated evidence and considering response strategies. The view from his windows encompassed the entire Bay Area, a sprawling metropolis where millions of people navigated systems that could either support their aspirations or crush their hopes depending on factors often beyond their control. Jasmine Washington had played by every rule society established for overcoming disadvantage. She had pursued education, maintained employment, served her community, and prioritized her daughter's welfare above her own comfort. In return, powerful people who should have faced consequences for their crimes had instead redirected those consequences toward an innocent family. David's intercom buzzed with a call from his head of security. Sir, We've identified the primary individual responsible for the harassment campaign against Jasmine Washington, Dr. Kenneth Morrison, former Medicare billing administrator at Richmond General. He's currently employed as Director of Financial Operations at Bay Area Medical Consortium, which oversees contractor relationships for multiple hospital systems, including several in Oakland. The name triggered recognition in David's memory. Bay Area Medical Consortium had approached Harlow Technologies 18 months earlier about software solutions for streamlining insurance claim processing. The proposal had been declined due to concerns about data security protocols, but David remembered reviewing Morrison's presentation and finding his approach to healthcare economics troublingly focused on profit maximization over patient care. Dr. Morrison has used his current position to influence hiring decisions at restaurants and apartment complexes that contract with consortium hospitals for employee services, Marcus continued. He's also been sharing Jasmine's personal information with associates who continue to harass her family through various channels. David felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same mental state that had enabled him to outmaneuver competitors and build a business empire through strategic thinking, rather than emotional reactions. Kenneth Morrison had chosen to abuse his professional position to persecute someone who posed no threat to him personally. That decision was about to become the most expensive mistake of his career. Schedule a meeting with Dr. Morrison, David instructed. Tell him Harlow Technologies is reconsidering software partnerships with Bay Area Medical Consortium and wants to discuss expanded collaboration opportunities. Make sure the meeting happens at his office and arrange for it to be recorded through our standard business documentation procedures. As David prepared to leave the office, he paused at the windows overlooking the city lights that stretched toward Oakland. Somewhere in those lights, Jasmine was probably helping Destiny with homework, unaware that powerful people had been systematically sabotaging her life for reasons that had nothing to do with her own actions. Tomorrow, that pattern would begin to change. But first, David needed to understand exactly how deep the conspiracy extended and who else required the kind of correction that only real consequences could provide. The Bay Area Medical Consortium headquarters occupied a gleaming 12-story building in Walnut Creek, its facade designed to project stability and prosperity rather than the warmth typically associated with healthcare organizations. David arrived 30 minutes early for his scheduled meeting with Dr. Kenneth Morrison. Using the extra time to observe the facility's operations and gather intelligence about the organization's culture and priorities, the lobby featured expensive marble flooring and abstract sculptures that suggested significant investment in image management. Wall displays highlighted the consortium's partnerships with prestigious medical institutions, but notably absent were any references to patient care outcomes or community health initiatives. Instead, the messaging focused on operational efficiency, cost containment, and technological innovation that improved profit margins rather than treatment effectiveness. David had dressed for the meeting in his most authoritative business attire, a custom-tailored charcoal suit that conveyed both wealth and seriousness, Italian leather shoes that whispered rather than clicked against the marble, and a Swiss watch whose understated elegance spoke volumes to those who recognized quality. His appearance was calculated to project exactly the kind of potential partner that would capture Morrison's full attention and cooperation. "Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Morrison will see you now," announced the receptionist, a young woman whose nervous demeanor suggested working for the financial director required constant vigilance against making mistakes. She led David through corridors lined with awards and certifications that emphasized fiscal achievements rather than medical accomplishments. Dr. Kenneth Morrison's office reflected the personality of someone who measured success entirely through financial metrics. The space was dominated by multiple computer monitors displaying real-time data about insurance claim processing, cost per patient ratios, and revenue optimization algorithms. Morrison himself appeared to be in his early 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and expensive dental work that created an artificially bright smile. He wore a white lab coat despite having no patient care responsibilities, a costume choice that suggested either nostalgia for medical practice or deliberate misrepresentation of his current role. "Mr. Mitchell, welcome," Morrison said, extending a hand with the firm grip of someone conscious of power dynamics. "I'm delighted that Harlow Technologies is reconsidering our partnership proposal. Your company's reputation for innovation precedes you." David accepted the handshake while activating the discreet recording device concealed in his jacket pocket. "Dr. Morrison, thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice. I've been reviewing your consortium's approach to healthcare economics, and I'm impressed by your results." Morrison's chest swelled with obvious pride. "We've revolutionized the financial side of medical care in the Bay Area. Too many healthcare administrators still think like doctors instead of business leaders. They let sentiment interfere with sound economic decision-making." "Interesting perspective," David replied, settling into the offered chair. "Could you elaborate on how you've overcome that challenge?" "Absolutely." Morrison activated a presentation on his wall-mounted screen, displaying charts and graphs that reduced human suffering to statistical abstractions. Traditional healthcare management focuses on individual patient outcomes rather than systemic efficiency. We've implemented protocols that prioritize resource allocation based on long-term sustainability rather than short-term emotional appeals. David nodded thoughtfully while internally recoiling at Morrison's casual dehumanization of medical care. That requires significant cultural change within partner organizations. How do you handle resistance from staff who might not share your vision? Morrison's smile took on a predatory quality that revealed his true character. Resistance typically comes from employees who lack the sophistication to understand modern healthcare economics. We use performance metrics that naturally select for staff who embrace efficiency over outdated notions of unlimited patient advocacy. "Performance metrics can be quite effective," David agreed. "I imagine you also monitor external threats to operational effectiveness." "Exactly," Morrison said, his enthusiasm building as he sensed a kindred spirit. "Troublemakers who try to undermine legitimate business practices through frivolous complaints or whistleblower actions. We maintain comprehensive databases of individuals who pose risks to partner organizations." David felt his pulse quicken as Morrison approached the territory they needed to explore. "How do you identify such individuals?" Morrison leaned forward conspiratorially. "Background checks, credit monitoring, employment verification systems. Once someone demonstrates a pattern of challenging authority or questioning established procedures, we ensure that information follows them throughout their career." "That seems like a significant responsibility," David observed. "How do you determine when someone has crossed the line from legitimate advocacy to disruptive behavior?" "Professional judgment based on years of experience," Morrison replied smugly. "For example, I dealt with a particularly troublesome situation involving a nurse's aide who filed multiple complaints about Medicare billing procedures. Even after we resolved the issues through proper administrative channels, her family continued to pose potential risks to healthcare institutions throughout the region." David's jaw clenched as Morrison casually admitted to targeting Dorothy Washington. "And her family? How did you address those ongoing risks?" Morrison's expression grew darker, revealing glimpses of the vindictive personality beneath his professional facade. "Information sharing among healthcare partners. Employment references that highlight relevant behavioral patterns. Credit and background monitoring to ensure appropriate oversight of high-risk individuals." The family members were also considered high risk. "Association patterns indicate elevated probability of similar troublemaking behavior," Morrison said, with clinical detachment. "The daughter, for instance, showed clear signs of following her mother's disruptive tendencies." multiple job applications in healthcare-adjacent fields, attempts to improve her living situation in areas where she might influence other employees, continued community organizing activities that suggest ongoing hostility toward institutional authority. David struggled to maintain his composed exterior as Morrison described the systematic harassment of Jasmine and Destiny with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing pest control. Your monitoring of this individual seems quite comprehensive. Necessary precautions, Morrison affirmed. Healthcare institutions invest significant resources in employee recruitment and training. Protecting that investment requires proactive identification and management of potential disruption sources. We've developed sophisticated systems for tracking individuals across multiple sectors and ensuring that relevant information reaches decision-makers before hiring or housing decisions are finalized. The admission was even more damning than David had expected. Morrison wasn't just retaliating against Dorothy Washington's whistleblowing. He had created an entire infrastructure for persecuting anyone who challenged healthcare industry corruption. Jasmine was suffering not because of personal vendetta, but as part of a broader campaign to intimidate potential whistleblowers through visible punishment of their families. This tracking system sounds quite sophisticated, David said carefully. How many individuals are currently being monitored? Morrison consulted one of his computer screens, apparently feeling secure enough with his perceived ally to share operational details. Approximately 300 active files across Northern California. We maintain basic monitoring for roughly 2,000 additional individuals who have demonstrated concerning behavioral patterns, but haven't yet crossed thresholds requiring active intervention. David felt sick realizing the scope of Morrison's operation. Thousands of healthcare workers, their families, and community advocates were being systematically harassed for having the courage to report problems or challenge unethical practices. The conspiracy extended far beyond Jasmine's individual situation. The technology requirements for such comprehensive monitoring must be substantial, David observed. That's exactly why we're interested in partnering with Harlow Technologies. Morrison said eagerly, "Your company's data integration capabilities could streamline our current processes significantly. Right now, we're using multiple software platforms and manual coordination between partner organizations. A unified system would improve both efficiency and effectiveness." David realized Morrison was essentially asking him to provide technological tools for enhanced persecution of whistleblowers and their families. The man's moral blindness was so complete that he couldn't conceive of anyone objecting to his methods. Once they understood the supposed benefits. "Before we discuss technical specifications," David said, "I'd like to understand the legal framework supporting these monitoring activities. Surely there are privacy regulations and employment law considerations that affect system design." Morrison waved dismissively. "Legal departments handle compliance issues. Our focus is operational effectiveness. Besides, most of the individuals we monitor have compromised their own privacy expectations through their disruptive behavior. When someone chooses to challenge legitimate business practices, they forfeit certain protections that apply to cooperative employees." The casual dismissal of legal protections revealed Morrison's belief that his position placed him above accountability. David recognized the arrogance of someone who had operated without consequences for so long that he no longer considered the possibility of being held responsible for his actions. "I'm curious about specific success stories," David pressed. "Can you share examples of how your monitoring system has protected healthcare institutions from potential problems?" Morrison's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone eager to boast about his accomplishments. "Excellent question. Just last month, we prevented a major disruption at Oakland General Hospital by ensuring that a particular individual was not hired for a supervisory position in their dietary services department." David's blood chilled as he realized Morrison was describing interference with one of Jasmine's job applications, What made this individual particularly concerning? Family history of challenging authority, documented financial instability that could motivate desperate behavior, and community organizing experience that suggested potential for mobilizing other employees against management decisions. Morrison explained with clinical precision. Our intervention saved Oakland General from probable labor disputes and potential regulatory complaints. How did you intervene? Morrison leaned back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. Discreet communication with their human resources director about the candidate's background. We provided documented evidence of behavioral patterns that raised concerns about cultural fit and management potential. The hospital made the prudent decision to select a less problematic candidate. David struggled to control his rage as Morrison described destroying Jasmine's opportunity with the same tone others might use to discuss successful pest control. The man genuinely believed he was performing valuable services by preventing qualified people from advancing their careers based on their family's ethical stands. Your system seems remarkably effective, David managed to say. How do you measure success in these interventions? Multiple metrics, Morrison replied, activating another screen display. Reduction in whistleblower complaints among partner institutions, decreased labor union organizing activity, improved employee compliance with cost containment initiatives. Over the past 3 years, we've achieved a 47% reduction in problematic employee behavior across consortium partners. The statistics represented thousands of healthcare workers who had been intimidated into silence about patient care violations, safety concerns, or financial irregularities. Morrison's success meant that problems were being hidden rather than addressed, creating dangers for patients and ethical healthcare providers throughout the region. I'm impressed by your comprehensive approach, David said, preparing to conclude the meeting before his disgust became obvious. Could you provide documentation about your current technological infrastructure? Our technical team will need detailed specifications to design appropriate integration solutions. Morrison eagerly agreed, promising to send comprehensive materials within 24 hours. As they concluded the meeting, he expressed enthusiasm about the potential partnership and confidence that Harlow Technologies would appreciate the commercial opportunities created by effective risk management systems. David left the consortium building with recorded evidence of Morrison's criminal conspiracy and detailed admissions of systematic harassment targeting hundreds of individuals. The meeting had exceeded his expectations for gathering incriminating material, but it had also revealed the staggering scope of corruption that extended far beyond Jasmine's individual situation. During the drive back to San Francisco, David placed encrypted calls to his legal team and investigative specialists. The evidence gathered during the Morrison meeting provided grounds for both civil litigation and criminal prosecution, but David wanted to ensure that any legal action would be comprehensive enough to dismantle the entire harassment network rather than simply addressing Morrison's individual crimes. We need federal involvement, David told his chief legal counsel Patricia Kim during their secure video conference that evening. This conspiracy crosses state lines, involves Medicare fraud, and constitutes systematic violation of whistleblower protection laws. I want the FBI, Department of Justice, and Health and Human Services Inspector General's office all briefed simultaneously. Patricia nodded gravely as she reviewed the evidence summaries. The recorded admissions alone justify federal prosecution under RICO statutes. Morrison essentially confessed to operating a criminal enterprise designed to obstruct federal investigations and retaliate against protected whistleblower activities. How quickly can we initiate formal proceedings? With this level of evidence, we can have federal agents executing search warrants within 72 hours. However, I recommend coordinating with victim advocacy organizations to ensure that individuals being harassed receive appropriate protection and support during the investigation process. David agreed, recognizing that legal prosecution would only address part of the damage Morrison had inflicted. Jasmine and hundreds of other victims would need comprehensive assistance to rebuild their lives and careers after years of systematic sabotage. I also want to establish a victim compensation fund, David continued. Jasmine Washington specifically, but also every other person who can demonstrate harm from this conspiracy. Full restitution for lost income, educational opportunities, housing costs, and related damages. That could amount to tens of millions of dollars, Patricia warned. Then that's what it costs, David replied firmly. These people suffered because they or their families tried to protect patients and taxpayers from healthcare fraud. They deserve more than justice. They deserve restoration. As the call concluded, David reflected on how the investigation had evolved from personal interest in helping one remarkable woman to uncovering a vast network of corruption that threatened the integrity of healthcare throughout Northern California. Morrison's arrogance had provided the evidence needed to destroy his operation, but the damage he had inflicted would require years to fully address. Tomorrow, David would begin the process of ensuring that Kenneth Morrison and his conspirators faced comprehensive consequences for their crimes. But tonight, his thoughts remained focused on a woman who continued serving her community despite systematic persecution, unaware that her circumstances were about to change dramatically. City lights sparkled below his penthouse windows as David prepared detailed instructions for his team. By this time next week, Morrison would be in federal custody, the harassment network would be dismantled, and Jasmine Washington would finally understand why her life had been so difficult despite her best efforts to succeed. Justice, David reflected, was about to arrive with the full force of federal law enforcement and unlimited financial resources. Kenneth Morrison had spent years believing his position made him untouchable. He was about to discover that true power belonged to those who used it to protect rather than persecute the innocent. 2 days after the recorded meeting with Morrison, David received intelligence that transformed his understanding of the conspiracy. From systematic harassment to something far more sinister. Marcus Chun arrived at the penthouse before dawn, carrying encrypted files that had required all-night analysis by David's most skilled forensic accountants and cybersecurity specialists. The Morrison operation is worse than we initially assessed. Marcus began without preamble, spreading documents across David's dining table. We've traced financial flows through the consortium's accounts and discovered they're not just preventing employment opportunities. They're actively destroying people's lives for profit. David poured coffee from his machine, noting how Marcus's usual composed demeanor showed cracks of genuine disturbance. In their decade of working together, Marcus had investigated corporate espionage, international fraud schemes, and political corruption without displaying personal emotion. Whatever he had uncovered clearly crossed lines that even experienced security professionals found disturbing. "Show me," David said simply. Marcus activated his tablet, displaying a complex web of financial transactions linking Bay Area Medical Consortium to collection agencies, predatory lenders, and employment background services. Morrison has monetized the harassment. Companies pay consortium fees for enhanced background screening. That includes manufactured negative reports about targeted individuals. The same companies then profit from the resulting financial distress through high-interest loans, debt collection services, and credit repair scams. The implications hit David like physical blows. Morrison wasn't just persecuting whistleblowers out of vindictive spite. He had created a profitable business model based on systematically destroying people's economic stability and then extracting money from their desperation. Jasmine Washington specifically, Marcus continued, has been charged over $3,000 in background verification fees by companies she never contacted, all traced back to consortium partners. Her credit score has been artificially lowered through false reporting that triggers automatic rejections for housing and employment. She's been targeted by 4 different predatory lending schemes offering emergency assistance with terms designed to create permanent debt dependency. David studied the documentation with growing horror. Every setback Jasmine had experienced, every opportunity that had mysteriously disappeared, every financial emergency that had pushed her family closer to homelessness had been orchestrated by Morrison's network for their economic benefit. The pattern extends to approximately 60% of their monitored individuals, Marcus added. Morrison has transformed retaliation into a revenue stream. The worse he makes their lives, the more money his partners extract from their suffering. How much total revenue? Marcus consulted his notes. Conservative estimate, $8.7 million annually from direct victim exploitation. Additional revenue from selling victim data to marketing companies, insurance fraud schemes, and employment discrimination services that help other businesses avoid hiring problematic candidates. David felt something cold and implacable settle in his chest. Morrison had perverted the concept of healthcare administration into a weapon for systematic exploitation of vulnerable people. His victims weren't just denied opportunities. They were being actively harvested for profit by the same system that was supposed to protect their health and well-being. "I want Morrison under surveillance," David ordered. "Full spectrum monitoring. Every call, every meeting, every financial transaction. If he orders coffee, I want to know what brand and how he paid for it." "Already in progress," Marcus confirmed. "We've also identified his key associates and begun monitoring their activities. What we've observed suggests they're planning to expand operations significantly." Before Marcus could elaborate, both men's phones buzzed simultaneously with urgent alerts from their monitoring systems. David's expression darkened as he read the notification. Morrison was currently at Oakland General Hospital for an unscheduled meeting with senior administrators, including the director of dietary services where Jasmine had recently applied for a supervisory position. "He's making another move against her," David said grimly. "Real-time surveillance shows he arrived 30 minutes ago with printed documentation and a presentation laptop," Marcus confirmed. "Want me to activate close proximity monitoring?" David was already reaching for his jacket. "We're going ourselves. I want to witness Morrison's methods firsthand before we destroy him." The drive to Oakland took 25 minutes through morning traffic that moved with typical Bay Area frustration. David used the time to review additional intelligence Marcus had compiled about Oakland General's financial vulnerabilities. The hospital was struggling with budget shortfalls that made them susceptible to Morrison's cost-cutting proposals, particularly if those proposals came with promises of increased efficiency and reduced liability exposure. Oakland General occupied a sprawling complex that had grown organically over decades, its architecture reflecting different eras of healthcare philosophy and funding availability. The main building retained Art Deco elements from its 1940s construction, while newer wings displayed the institutional modernism of various expansion periods. Despite obvious budget constraints, the facility maintained cleanliness and functionality that suggested dedicated staff working with limited resources. David and Marcus entered through the visitor entrance, signing in as consultants for a fictional medical technology company. Their carefully prepared credentials withstood casual scrutiny, and hospital security was focused on preventing theft rather than investigating potential surveillance operations. They positioned themselves in a public seating area adjacent to the administrative offices, where Marcus deployed sophisticated listening devices that could capture conversations through standard office walls. Morrison's voice emerged clearly through their earpieces, his tone carrying the false warmth he used when manipulating institutional partners. "The individual in question presents multiple risk factors that could expose Oakland General to significant liability issues," he was explaining to the dietary services director, Dr. Jennifer Martinez. "Our background analysis indicates patterns of confrontational behavior, financial instability that could motivate theft or fraud, and family history of challenging institutional authority through regulatory complaints. Hiring this individual for a supervisory role would place other employees and patients at unnecessary risk. David felt his jaw clench as Morrison deployed the same dehumanizing language he had used during their recorded meeting. Reducing Jasmine to a collection of fabricated risk factors designed to trigger administrative anxiety. Dr. Martinez's response suggested someone genuinely concerned about making responsible hiring decisions. Ms. Washington's qualifications are excellent, and her references from previous employers have been uniformly positive. Are you certain about these behavioral concerns? Absolutely certain, Morrison replied with practiced confidence. Bay Area Medical Consortium maintains comprehensive databases on high-risk individuals throughout the healthcare sector. Ms. Washington's profile indicates elevated probability of workplace disruption, potential for organizing other employees against management initiatives, and documented history of family members filing frivolous complaints against healthcare institutions. Could you provide specific documentation? Dr. Martinez asked. Confidentiality restrictions prevent sharing detailed records, Morrison said smoothly, but I can assure you that hiring this individual would expose Oakland General to problems that could affect your hospital's reputation and financial stability. Given your current budget pressures, avoiding unnecessary risks should be a priority. David exchanged glances with Marcus as Morrison deployed subtle threats disguised as helpful advice. The implication was clear: hire Jasmine and face unspecified consequences that could worsen the hospital's financial situation. We appreciate your consultation, Dr. Martinez said after a pause that suggested internal conflict between fairness and institutional caution. I'll need to discuss this with our Human Resources Department before making final decisions. Of course, Morrison agreed. I'm confident you'll reach the appropriate conclusion. Oakland General has always demonstrated sound judgment in personnel matters. The meeting continued for another 15 minutes, with Morrison providing additional fabricated concerns about Jasmine while positioning himself as a valuable resource for future hiring decisions. His performance was masterful in its manipulation of legitimate administrative concerns about liability and workplace stability. As Morrison prepared to leave, he made an offer that revealed another dimension of his operation. Bay Area Medical Consortium is always looking for opportunities to support community healthcare institutions. If Oakland General would be interested in preferred vendor status for our employment screening services, we could provide significant discounts on comprehensive background analysis for all future hires. David realized Morrison was using Jasmine's case as a sales demonstration for expanding his harassment network to include Oakland General's hiring processes. Every future job applicant would be subject to his manufactured risk assessments, creating opportunities for ongoing revenue while providing Morrison with increased power over healthcare employment throughout the region. After Morrison departed, David and Marcus remained in position to monitor the aftermath of his visit. Dr. Martinez immediately called Oakland General's Human Resources Director to discuss the unexpected concerns about their preferred candidate for the dietary supervisor position. I've never encountered anything like this, Dr. Martinez said during the recorded conversation. Ms. Washington's interview was exceptional. Her qualifications exceeded our requirements, and every reference described her as exemplary. But Dr. Morrison provided compelling evidence of potential problems that could create serious liability. Issues? What kind of evidence? The HR director asked. He couldn't share specifics due to confidentiality restrictions, but he indicated family history of filing complaints against healthcare institutions and patterns of confrontational behavior that could disrupt workplace harmony. Given our budget situation, we can't afford problems that might trigger regulatory investigations or labor disputes. David felt sick listening to Morrison's lies take root in the minds of well-intentioned administrators who were making decisions based on fabricated information, designed to protect Morrison's criminal associates from accountability. Should we contact the candidate directly about these concerns? The HR director suggested. Dr. Morrison advised against that approach, Dr. Martinez replied. He indicated that confrontational personalities often respond to questions about their background with increased hostility and potential legal threats. He recommended simply selecting one of our other qualified candidates to avoid unnecessary complications. That seems prudent, the HR director agreed. I'll draft a standard rejection letter citing competitive candidate pool and budget constraints. No specific mention of the background concerns. The call ended with Oakland General's decision to withdraw their job offer from Jasmine based entirely on Morrison's manufactured accusations. David witnessed the exact process through which qualified, ethical people were systematically excluded from healthcare employment, while those responsible for the exclusion profited from the resulting desperation. As they left the hospital, David's phone rang with a call from FBI Special Agent Catherine Reynolds, who had been briefed about the Morrison investigation through David's legal team's coordination with federal authorities. Mr. Mitchell, we've reviewed the evidence your team provided, and we're prepared to move forward with immediate action, Agent Reynolds reported. However, we've discovered that Morrison is planning something that requires urgent intervention. David stepped into Marcus's vehicle before responding. What kind of something? Intelligence suggests Morrison is organizing a conference for healthcare administrators throughout Northern California, scheduled for this weekend. The agenda includes presentations about advanced risk management techniques and innovative approaches to employee behavioral monitoring. We believe he's attempting to expand his harassment network before potential investigations can interfere. The implications were staggering. Morrison intended to systematize his persecution methods across hundreds of healthcare institutions, creating a regional network that could destroy thousands of additional lives while generating millions in illegal revenue. How many institutions are expected to attend? Preliminary registration indicates over 200 healthcare facilities, ranging from major hospital systems to small clinics and nursing homes. If Morrison succeeds in implementing his systems broadly, the scope of potential victimization would increase exponentially. David felt a familiar cold determination settle over him. Morrison's arrogance had provided opportunities to gather evidence, but now his ambition threatened to create harm on a scale that demanded immediate intervention. Agent Reynolds, I want Morrison arrested before that conference begins. And I want every healthcare administrator who attends to understand exactly what they were being invited to participate in. We're coordinating with multiple federal agencies to execute simultaneous raids on Morrison's operation and all associated facilities, Agent Reynolds confirmed. The evidence you provided gives us jurisdiction under federal racketeering, fraud, and civil rights violation statutes. Morrison and his associates will face charges that carry potential sentences of 20 to 30 years. After ending the call, David instructed Marcus to drive to the MLK Community Center. Tonight was Jasmine's volunteer evening, and David wanted to see her one more time before her world changed forever. She had no idea that the systematic obstacles she had faced were about to be revealed as criminal conspiracy, or that the people responsible were about to face comprehensive justice. But first, David needed to witness Morrison's true nature one final time. Intelligence indicated the healthcare administrator would be making personal visits to key conference attendees, using individual meetings to customize his sales presentations for different institutional vulnerabilities. Morrison's next scheduled stop was Richmond General Hospital, the facility where Dorothy Washington had worked for 4 decades and filed the whistleblower complaints that had triggered his vendetta against her family. David realized Morrison was returning to the scene of his original crimes, probably hoping to recruit Richmond General's current administration into his expanded harassment network. The irony was too perfect to ignore. Morrison would be arrested at the very hospital where his criminal career had begun, surrounded by evidence of the corruption he had tried to conceal through persecution of an innocent family. Justice, David reflected, sometimes demonstrated a sense of poetry that exceeded human imagination. Tomorrow, Kenneth Morrison would discover that his victims had found a protector with resources equal to his malice and a commitment to accountability that would make his remaining years far less comfortable than he anticipated. The Federal Coordination Center, established in a secure conference room at the San Francisco FBI field office, buzzed with focused energy as agents, prosecutors, and technical specialists finalized plans for what would become the largest healthcare fraud takedown in Northern California history. David sat at the head of the table, his presence unusual for a civilian, but justified by his role in uncovering the conspiracy and his resources. Contribution to the investigation. Special Agent Catherine Reynolds commanded the operation with military precision, her 20-year career in financial crimes having prepared her for complex cases, but rarely ones with such extensive victim impact. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time surveillance feeds from Morrison's office, his scheduled meeting locations, and the homes and workplaces of his key associates, who would be arrested simultaneously. Target acquisition commences at 0600. Tomorrow, Agent Reynolds announced to the assembled team, Dr. Kenneth Morrison will be taken into custody at Richmond General Hospital during his scheduled meeting with their administrative board. Secondary targets include Morrison's 3 primary associates, 2 consortium board members, and the directors of 6 partner organizations that facilitated the harassment operations. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chun, no relation to Marcus, despite the shared surname, reviewed the comprehensive indictment that would be unsealed following the arrests. Federal charges include conspiracy to commit racketeering, healthcare fraud, violation of federal whistleblower protection statutes, systematic civil rights violations, and wire fraud conspiracy. Combined sentences for the primary defendants could exceed 200 years. David nodded grimly, satisfied that the legal consequences would match the scope of Morrison's crimes. However, his focus remained on ensuring that victims received not just justice, but comprehensive restoration of their damaged lives and careers. The Victim Compensation Fund is fully capitalized, Patricia Kim reported via secure video link from Harlow Technologies Legal Department. Initial payments will begin processing immediately after arrest warrants are executed. Ms. Washington specifically will receive full restitution for documented losses, plus additional compensation for pain and suffering resulting from the systematic harassment. How much are we talking about? Agent Reynolds asked. Conservative estimate for Jasmine Washington, $400,000 in direct damages, including lost wages, housing costs, educational expenses, and professional opportunity costs. Additional punitive damages could reach $1.2 million, Patricia replied. Total victim compensation across all identified cases approaches $37 million. The figure represented more money than most people would see in multiple lifetimes, but David considered it a modest price for correcting years of systematic persecution that had destroyed families and enabled continued healthcare corruption throughout the region. Timeline for victim notification? David inquired. Coordinated communication begins immediately after arrests are completed, Agent Reynolds confirmed. Victim services coordinators will contact each individual personally to explain what happened to them, how their circumstances are about to improve, and what resources are available for rebuilding their lives and careers. David's secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Marcus Chun, who was conducting final surveillance of Morrison's movements. The healthcare administrator was currently reviewing presentation materials for tomorrow's Richmond General meeting, apparently unaware that federal agents were monitoring his every communication and preparing to end his criminal career. Morrison's conference agenda, David said, sharing Marcus's intelligence with the federal team. 237 healthcare institutions confirmed attendance for this weekend's Advanced Risk Management Summit. Morrison planned to sell his harassment technology to every major medical facility from Sacramento to San Jose. Agent Reynolds studied the participant list with obvious concern. If he had succeeded, we would have been looking at potential victimization numbering in the tens of thousands. Healthcare workers throughout Northern California would have been subject to systematic persecution for reporting safety violations or questioning administrative decisions. The scope of Morrison's ambition revealed the true magnitude of David's intervention. What had begun as compassion for one struggling mother had evolved into prevention of a conspiracy that could have corrupted healthcare employment across multiple metropolitan areas. Conference location secured, David asked. Grand Hyatt in downtown San Francisco, Agent Reynolds confirmed. We'll have undercover agents registered as attendees, and technical surveillance equipment will record every presentation in private conversation. Participants who were unaware of Morrison's criminal methods will receive educational briefings about their legal obligations to report healthcare fraud. Those who were knowing participants will face appropriate charges. David's phone rang with a call from Sarah Martinez at his foundation, who had been coordinating with victim advocacy organizations throughout the Bay Area. Her voice carried excitement mixed with professional urgency. David, we've identified additional victims beyond the healthcare sector, Sarah reported. Morrison's network extends into education, social services, and nonprofit organizations. Teachers who reported administrative misconduct, social workers who challenged unsafe caseload policies, nonprofit employees who questioned financial irregularities. They've all been subjected to similar harassment patterns. The revelation expanded David's understanding of Morrison's operation from healthcare-specific retaliation to broad systematic suppression of ethical employees across multiple sectors. Anyone who challenged institutional corruption, regardless of their professional field, had become targets for harassment designed to discourage others from reporting problems. How many additional victims? Preliminary estimates suggest over 800 individuals across 15 different sectors. Total economic damage exceeds $100 million when we include lost career advancement, educational opportunities, and housing stability. David felt the familiar cold determination settle over him as the scope of Morrison's crimes continued expanding. The man had created an entire shadow economy based on persecuting ethical people and profiting from their resulting desperation. Expand the Victim Compensation Fund accordingly, David instructed. Every person harmed by this conspiracy deserves full restoration, regardless of the total cost. After ending the call, David turned his attention to the final phase of preparation, ensuring that Morrison's arrest would occur in circumstances that provided maximum dramatic impact while guaranteeing his complete legal exposure. Richmond General Hospital held special significance as the location where Dorothy Washington had worked for 4 decades and filed the whistleblower complaints that triggered Morrison's vendetta against her family. Agent Reynolds had arranged for Morrison's arrest to occur during his presentation to the hospital's board of directors, where he would be explaining his risk management services while federal agents documented his attempted expansion of criminal operations. Hospital security has been briefed and is fully cooperative, Agent Reynolds reported. Morrison will be allowed to begin his presentation to establish intent for conspiracy charges, then arrested during his description of victim monitoring techniques. Board members will serve as witnesses to his attempted recruitment of their institution into his criminal network. David requested permission to observe the arrest from a discreet location within the hospital. Agent Reynolds initially resisted civilian involvement in active law enforcement operations, but David's role in uncovering the conspiracy and his financial contribution to victim compensation eventually persuaded her to approve his presence. Under strict security protocols, you'll be positioned in an adjacent conference room with audio and video feeds, Agent Reynolds stipulated. No direct involvement in the arrest itself, and immediate departure once custody is secured. David agreed to the limitations while privately planning his next phase of engagement with the investigation's aftermath. Morrison's arrest would end the immediate threat, but rebuilding the lives he had systematically destroyed would require sustained effort and resources that extended far beyond criminal prosecution. That evening, David drove to East Oakland for what he intended to be his final visit to the MLK Community Center before Jasmine's circumstances changed dramatically. She was serving dinner to the usual collection of families and individuals who depended on the center's services, moving between tables with the same graceful efficiency and genuine warmth he had observed during their first encounter. Tonight felt different, however, as David understood that he was witnessing the last evening of Jasmine's struggle against obstacles that had been artificially created and maintained by criminal conspiracy. Tomorrow she would begin learning that every setback, every denied opportunity, every financial emergency that had threatened her family's stability had been deliberately orchestrated by people who profited from her suffering. "You're becoming a regular," Jasmine said warmly as she served David's dinner. "I was hoping you'd join us again." "I wouldn't miss it," David replied truthfully. "How has your week been?" Jasmine's expression dimmed slightly. "Challenging. The supervisor position at Oakland General didn't work out after all. They said they decided to promote from within, but..." She shrugged with practiced resilience. "Something better will come along. It always does." David felt his chest tighten with knowledge of exactly why the Oakland General opportunity had disappeared and who was responsible for its loss. Tomorrow, Jasmine would understand that her optimistic faith in eventual justice hadn't been misplaced, just delayed until someone with appropriate resources could intervene effectively. "I believe good things are coming for you," David said carefully. "Sometimes change arrives when we least expect it." "That's what my grandmother always said," Jasmine smiled. "She used to tell me that the universe keeps track of debts, and eventually everyone gets what they deserve." The irony of her words struck David with particular force, given that Morrison would be discovering the accuracy of Dorothy Washington's philosophy within 12 hours. As the evening progressed, David observed the community center's operations with a new understanding of how Morrison's persecution had affected not just Jasmine individually but the broader network of services she provided to vulnerable populations. Her reduced income and constrained opportunities had limited her ability to contribute time and resources to community programs, creating ripple effects that damaged the social support systems serving East Oakland's most disadvantaged residents. Morrison's crimes hadn't just targeted individual victims. They had systematically weakened the community infrastructure that provided essential services to people who depended on volunteer dedication and grassroots organizing. The full scope of harm extended far beyond what could be measured in lost wages or denied opportunities. After dinner service concluded, David helped with cleanup while engaging Jasmine in conversation about her long-term aspirations for community development. Her passion for creating neighborhood-based solutions to food security and economic empowerment remained undiminished despite years of systematic sabotage of her personal advancement. "I keep updating my community kitchen proposal," she confided, "while stacking chairs. Probably silly to spend time on something I'll never have resources to implement, but the planning process helps me stay focused on goals beyond just surviving each month." "It's not silly at all," David assured her. "Great ideas deserve development regardless of current circumstances. You never know when opportunities might suddenly appear." As they prepared to leave the community center, Jasmine paused in the doorway and looked back at the modest space where she had served hundreds of meals and countless hours of volunteer service despite her own financial struggles. Places like this keep me hopeful, she said quietly. Even when everything else feels impossible, there's something powerful about people taking care of each other without expecting anything in return. David nodded, understanding that her philosophy represented exactly the values Morrison's network had tried to destroy through systematic persecution. Tomorrow, those values would be vindicated through comprehensive justice that restored not just individual victims, but the community networks they served. "Jasmine," David said as they walked toward the bus stop, "I want you to know that your dedication to helping others hasn't gone unnoticed. The community you've built here matters more than you realize." She smiled with the quiet dignity that had first captured David's attention weeks earlier. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes it's hard to believe that what we do makes a real difference." "It does," David assured her. "And I have a feeling that very soon, you'll have opportunities to make an even greater impact." As Jasmine's bus arrived and carried her toward home, David reflected on the transformation about to unfold in her life. Within hours, Morrison would be in federal custody, his criminal network dismantled, and his victims beginning the process of comprehensive restoration. But more importantly, people like Jasmine Washington would finally receive recognition for their resilience, compassion, and unwavering commitment to community service despite systematic persecution designed to break their spirits and destroy their hope. Justice, David had learned, wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about restoring the conditions that allowed ethical people to thrive and serve others without fear of retaliation from those who profited from corruption and exploitation. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of that restoration for hundreds of victims across Northern California. Tonight was the last evening that Kenneth Morrison would sleep as a free man, unaware that his criminal empire was about to collapse under the weight of his own arrogance and the determination of those he had tried to destroy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from U.S.